Yes, the Iowa Hawkeyes are getting a transfer quarterback to actually visit. It's a visit, but it's a start. We break it down today. Locked on Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Well, it is official. Iowa is going to get a visit from former Northwestern quarterback Brendan Sullivan. It is a name that has been bandied about now for the last couple of weeks, and he'll be making a visit coming up on Tuesday to the University of Iowa. It is a position that is of great need for Iowa going into a season right now, currently with just two quarterbacks on the roster. Incoming true freshman James Rezar, he will not arrive until next month in June, and even then, a long ways to go at the quarterback position. It is a two-headed monster at the quarterback spot right now. Cade McNamara coming off a torn ACL and back-to-back lost seasons because of injury from him, and Marco Lainez. And as we saw Lainez in the bowl game in our limited look at him, a long ways to go at the quarterback position. Brendan Sullivan, of the quarterbacks that have been talked about here over the last couple of weeks, is probably the one that is the safest, and I think the one that makes the most sense. When you look at some of the quarterbacks that we've talked about here on Locked On Hawkeyes, General Booty, that was a fun one, right? Because of the name, you get a kick out of it. Former Oklahoma quarterback, he was buried on the depth chart. His uncle was John David Booty. You might remember him from back in the day. Still, this was a guy that, if his name was Jack Booty, it'd still be pretty funny. But come on, it's not the same. General Booty. But as a quarterback, he had some decent JUCO stats. You take the name away, there wouldn't be nearly the notoriety and probably the excitement of somebody like that. Sam Heward is a name that we threw out last week here, and I saw a little bit of buzz. I know Scott Docterman had mentioned the name a day or two later, and a couple other people on the Iowa beat. And this is a guy that was a former five-star quarterback, goes to Washington, where his dad played, where his uncle played, and played a little bit with the Huskies. Wasn't great, but wasn't awful. Had a nice solid season as he transferred down to the FCS level at Cal Poly this past season. But a guy that's been on the West Coast for his whole career, his whole life, probably didn't make a whole lot of sense, and I don't think he had any connections there, though maybe something there with 2 years of eligibility. And Cooper Legas has also been a guy that's talked about at Utah State, just because we saw him this past season at Kinnick Stadium. Looked pretty good. I thought he played pretty well against the Iowa defense early in the season in that game, but overall, those have been probably the four names that are mentioned most. And I think Sullivan is the guy. Former Northwestern quarterback, all right, Big Ten pedigree, a guy that was recruited out of high school by Tim Lester, the new offensive coordinator. You check a couple of boxes there. Does have a couple of years of eligibility, and that's another thing that you're looking at, because you certainly don't want to go into next season just hoping that somebody of the youth hits, or that you're in the portal again looking for a starting quarterback, and that still very well could be the case. I mean, to think that even if they get somebody of the ilk of Brendan Sullivan, and they have on campus Lainez, they got Rezar there, they have the incoming kid from Indiana, yeah, that's fine. But to think that they're not going to be shopping for another portal quarterback, I think is a little bit silly. But it's a competent backup, and that's where you start. Sullivan didn't set the world on fire, but he was solid. A completion percentage is one of the first things you look at. And 2 years ago, he completed 74% of his passes, 71-96 throwing. I mean, think of that. Yeah, a quarterback, that's allowed. I know as Hawkeye fans, it's sometimes difficult to wrap your mind around, but yes, quarterbacks, they complete sometimes over 50, 60, yes, even 70% of their passes. Something that we haven't seen, certainly in the Kirk Ferentz regime. 4 touchdowns against 3 interceptions that year. Then this past season came in after an injury, completed 63.6% of his passes, 7.2 yards per attempt, and 6 touchdowns against 2 interceptions. Also can run it, good size, 6'3", 225. This is what you're looking for here. This is a realistic option, an option that makes a whole lot of sense. And let's hope they get this thing tied up, right? Don't have to continue the consternation about finding a backup quarterback, somebody that will be ready to go with Cade McNamara. And I think somebody that'll push Cade McNamara. Look, the gap between Cade McNamara right now and everybody else, even coming off an ACL injury, is significant. But somebody to push him, I don't think that's a bad thing. And if it ruffles some feathers, if it leads to some frustration, so be it. It's big boy football. And Iowa doesn't owe anything to Cade McNamara. They don't. If they want to go out and they want to find a quarterback to compete with him, absolutely, they can do it. And Cade McNamara hasn't led Iowa to anything. Cade McNamara played 5 games, and though he was injured them before the eventual ACL tear, Iowa, this is not something where he's won them a Big Ten championship, that he's even taken them to a division championship or a bowl game. He hasn't done that for Iowa. Let's do it. Let's make this happen. It makes a whole lot of sense, and certainly I think something that's going to be good in the long run for Iowa. Excuse me there. If you hear me, yes, we're still battling off a bit of a cold from last week. Sickness running through the Condon household. My apologies for that. We're battling. We're going to make our way through this, and we got a lot more to talk about. One other note in football, this one a little bit intriguing. This comes from HawkeyeReport.com and Blair Sanderson over there, as Iowa has reached out and they have started following a defensive tackle prospect. So we've obviously talked a lot about quarterback, the need for a backup at minimum at that position. Wide receiver, they missed on Raylan Sharp. Okay, that stings, but so be it. He goes to Fresno, and I'm sure they're still shopping and looking for other wide receivers. The other one is defensive tackle. You look at the starters, you feel in great shape with Y.A. Black. Aaron Graves, I think you're going to see even another level out of him. Both those guys really good. And we saw some of the young guys show a little bit, but still there isn't a ton of depth at defensive tackle. And if you believe that, at defensive end, after your starters, you're going to get more out of Ethan Hurkett this year. You're going to get something out of Brian Allen. Those kind of guys, it's not a huge necessity to get another defensive end. However, defensive tackle, it's just not an overly deep position. As some of the younger guys, some of the redshirt freshmen, maybe have not panned out at the same way that people anticipated early on. This one makes sense. So they've reached out to a Wyoming defensive tackle, Gavin Meyer. Meyer is a guy that 8.5 tackles for a loss during his last 2 years as a starter. Not huge numbers, but it's a defensive tackle. I mean, you can't just go in and anticipate a guy's going to put up monster numbers at that kind of position there. But this one makes a whole lot of sense. We'll see if anything comes out of it. Some big programs have already reached out to Meyer from some of the things that have been posted out there. But one to keep an eye on, and something a little bit deeper down kind of our wish list, but something obviously incredibly important, building depth at defensive tackle. And that's been really the secret sauce of this Iowa defense and the defensive line over the last 8 years or so. After we saw the disappointment of the 2010 team coming on the heels of the Orange Bowl of 2009, coming off of that season, one of the reasons that they struggled and they lost so many leads in the fourth quarter that year is they didn't have depth at defensive line. The defensive line as a whole was great, 1 through 4. But there just wasn't depth. And you saw Adrian Claiborne. I just remember back to the game against Northwestern, being there at Ryan Field and seeing him with his hands on his hips and gasping for air because they were out there for a ton of plays and they didn't have the depth. And that's one thing that they built through over the last more than that, probably to 12 years or so, is having that kind of depth and having 6, 7, sometimes 8 or 9 guys, their ability to play at the defensive line and do it at a high level. And that's been one. So because of maybe not having that same kind of depth at D tackle, really like this move and this idea, and something that makes a whole lot of sense for Iowa football. What's next for Iowa basketball? Well, the women's roster appeared to be set. However, they have reached out to a former McDonald's All-American, and there's mutual interest. We'll talk about that. And Matt Cross, the big man from UMass, has picked SMU over Iowa. What does that mean for the men's basketball program? We'll talk about that. Plus, Iowa baseball gets a sweep over the weekend. A lot going on in Hawkeye land. We continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I have used LinkedIn Jobs as a small business owner. It is incredibly important. Almost as important as having your voice work while you're doing a podcast. LinkedIn Jobs does so many great things for small business owners. It's not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but they might be a perfect fit for what you're hiring for. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses, you have so much going on, doing so many different things. You might not have the time or the resources to make that right hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Trent Condon back with you once again here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. As we battle our way through and hope that our voice continues to hold up here during the show, let's talk some hoops. So, a disappointing news over the weekend as Matt Cross, power forward type, can play center in a pinch, guy that has been well-traveled for high schools, and now on to his fourth college program. Are there some warts? Sure. But beggars can't be choosers. He was a guy that can play, a guy that I thought fit incredibly well with Owen Freeman in the middle. This made a whole lot of sense. He took a visit to Iowa. According to the recruiting sites, it went well. Everything appeared to be good there, but he was still going to make his final visits, and he did, to TCU and SMU. He chooses SMU. So, two ways to look at this. First, it's frustrating, right? To lose out on a prospect of SMU. SMU is not a basketball power. SMU is not a basketball program that's very good. They've had pockets of success, but that's about it. But their ability to spend, as they bought their way into the ACC, saying that they're not even going to take television money for the next decade. What they can do financially is completely different than a place that Iowa can do. And though it may be not as dire in the basketball recruiting front on the men's side than some people would lead you to believe, there is still an effect that we're seeing with Iowa basketball where the funds aren't there. We're just seeing them continually coming up short, and it's frustrating, and it feels like it shouldn't be at this level, but this program's lost momentum. And anybody that listens, if you're an everydayer here, you know that I'm a fan of Fran McCaffrey. I believe he's a good basketball coach. If you go in a different direction, I doubt that I was going to find a better coach than Fran McCaffrey. It could happen. There's no doubt. But the likelihood you're going to have somebody that makes Iowa basketball and its current structure into a more consistent winner than they are right now is just not likely. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's loser talk, right? You're worried about the ugly thing. Well, if you sat through the Todd Licklider era, if you sat through the frustrations of the Steve Alford era, and even the back half of the Dr. Tom era, you'd understand it. That's not fun. It's not fun when, well, maybe we'll go to the NIT. It's not fun when that is what you're looking at and not even getting there. And as we saw the Licklider era, just how much it cratered. Fran McCaffrey needs to do more, though. He needs to be doing the things to generate interest. I hated the loss of the PTL, the Primetime League. Shirts and skins before football games. All these little things that on their own don't mean a whole lot, but they're really part of the fabric of Iowa basketball and part of that fandom. And having the ability to see guys and get to know them and learn and all these little things. You know, I know it right here. We are starved for content during the offseason. Look, I've been in sports talk radio now in the state of Iowa for the last 2 decades. And I know when we get to May, June, July, these are the light times. The primetime league was a godsend. It was something, it was just a talking point. And you're not going to overreact to some guy going off for 52 points in a primetime league, but it gave you a starting point and you're talking about it and you're generating interest. And that is gone. Scott Docterman of The Athletic, I thought, came up with a brilliant idea. We're going out and doing one of those old barnstorming tours where you go around to local high schools, you bring the team along, you can have a component of NIL there, have an appearance fee, they're going to get paid for it, you're going to make a little money for the guys, but go out and do those kind of things. I remember when the seniors would make those trips around and they come to some small high school gym up in North Iowa, where I was from, up by Osage, and it would be the biggest thing going. And they played, I think it was in Charles City one time. It was monstrous to get to see these guys just playing an exhibition game. Now, I understand also that basketball and just athletics in general are different than they were at that time. And the ability to see these guys is different than it was back in the 80s. But those kind of ideas need to come back because this fan base, what we're seeing right now is completely different than what's happening and what we're seeing across the country. You're losing to SMU for a recruit because the finances aren't there. That one definitely stings. What's next? Great question. It sounds like Iowa, the coaching staff is being very close to the vest. They don't want a whole lot of people in the recruiting industry kind of know some of the guys that they're after, which is understandable. Look, if you're not coming in with the full deck and you don't have a full house, you're trying to bluff your way maybe into hitting something out of the river and getting yourself a guy out of the portal here. Look, tons of guys are in the portal. There's still quality players out there, but I would need some help. And I will tell you another thing. As it looks, I would say more and more likely that Peyton Sanford is going to keep his name in the NBA draft. If that happens, this Iowa basketball team could be in big, big trouble. One team that's not going to be in big trouble next year is the Iowa women's team. And the addition of Lucy Olsen, I think, completely changes the complexion of this team going into next season. You were hopeful next year with Hannah Stulke coming back, Sydney Fulter, Taylor McCabe, Kylie Feuerbach, and then some of the new faces that you were going to see a team that maybe at least could contend for an NCAA tournament bid. Well, Lucy Olsen's addition, I think a minimum, makes them solidly an NCAA tournament team. And then we hear more. This from Kyle Huseman of Hawkeye Report, that there is mutual interest from both parties between Iowa and former McDonald's All-American Maryum Dauda. Played at Arkansas for her 2 seasons, and Arkansas is where she grew up in Bentonville, a suburb of Fayetteville, just outside there in Bentonville. Averaged 10.6 rebounds per game last season, shooting 45% from the floor, 32% from the three-point line. McDonald's All-American, had 10 block shots in a game. How about that, a rim protector? That would be nice to see. That's something that Iowa hasn't had a whole lot of, even with the good centers that they've had, is not that rim protection that certainly somebody like Dowdham could provide. Now, they are full in scholarships, so that is a component. They can find a way. Again, with NIL, as we've talked about on the football front, they will find a way. They're at 87 scholarships. They will be down to 85 by August. They will find a way, and the same thing here. And the same thing will happen with the women's team. If they're over, and you got a prospect like this that you can add, you will find a way. Be it somebody becomes a walk-on, and their scholarship then is paid for, or their tuition, is paid for. You go that route, they will find a way. We have to stop worrying about the scholarship thing. We just do. It's a different era. It's a different environment. We have to remember, because of this, we're going to find a way to make it work. This would be a big-time addition. Hayden, the 6'4" center coming in from Oregon, really good prospect. A lot of excitement about her, an ability for her to maybe learn on the job a little bit more. That makes a whole lot of sense. Suddenly, if Iowa can find a player like this, a post, 6'3", has size, an ability to shoot it from the outside, a rim protector on top of it, you couple that with what they have coming back, mention Lucy Olsen, making them, say, a top 30 team. Yeah, this one, we're talking back into the top 20. All of a sudden, Iowa women's basketball continues to roll, and then you get that momentum going for the class of 2025, 2026. Some big-time prospects are interested in Iowa. You're on the cusp here. making Iowa women's basketball a blue blood. It's something that can happen in all different spots. We don't have oceans. We don't have mountains. But we got a fan base that definitely celebrates the women athlete. And this could be something that goes in a big time level. Speaking of big time, Iowa finds a way to get the sweep over the weekend on the baseball field. On the diamond, we'll talk about that. Plus, Iowa softball doesn't qualify for the Big Ten tournament, and it's being played in Iowa City. Woof. It's a rough one. We go on the diamond next as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. Condon, you already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel your boards with, hilarious emojis to taunt friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot machine. There's always something new with time events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and download it free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on and search Monopoly Go. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. As always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. It was a sweep over the weekend for the Iowa baseball team as they dispatched the last place team in the Big Ten, Northwestern. But it is baseball, and it doesn't matter what level you're talking about. Always difficult to sweep anybody, and Iowa was able to do that. Now, as we've talked about throughout the course of this spring, Iowa is not in contention for an at-large bid. They sit at 26-18 overall. Their RPI sits at 102. This is not going to be a team that's going to get in to the NCAA tournament short, of winning the Big Ten tournament. However, this is something that solidifies their spot at minimum of getting into the Big Ten tournament. Not only that, I was in really good shape now. With just one series remaining, that goes on the road against Illinois. The Illini currently sit in first place in the Big Ten at 13-5. Iowa finds a way to win a game this weekend, they're going to be in. They win a couple games this weekend, they can dream a little bit of potentially being one of those top couple of seeds and certainly making their path much easier to get in. It appears at this point the top six are pretty solid in the Big Ten. You have Illinois alone in first place, a three-way tie in second with Nebraska, Purdue, and Indiana. Iowa sits a game and a half back of Illinois at 13-8. And then Michigan at 11-7. And then you get into a group of teams fighting their way to get into the Big Ten tournament. Michigan State, Maryland, Ohio State, Penn State, and Minnesota. Those are the teams fighting to get in. Northwestern, along with Rutgers, bringing up the rear in the conference. This team is banged up. This team had a couple of their better hitters that have gone out, and yet they still found a way to get it done. Lightly used player on Sunday gets the walk-off winner in extra innings. They're just finding a way. And crazy things happen. Look, you get a little momentum here. You can see it happen. And the bullpen has been much better. Brody Brecht has been elite. Now, you're only going to get him for probably one start and potentially two, depending on what they do at the beginning of things. And you think probably Brody Brecht's going to get the ball in game one of the Big Ten tournament. Probably a path he can go. We'll see. Is there anything left in the gun if he can get out there, and pitch if they get to a finale in that. But that aside, it's been a disappointing season, no doubt, but they're making amends. They're making strides here at the end of the season. As mentioned, the bullpen has pitched so much better. The midweek loss to North Dakota State was head-scratching, but here they are in the Big Ten tournament. We go the other side and the other diamond to the Iowa women. And this has been rough. A season ago, they made a great run in what equates to the NIT. And they go out, they win that tournament. It looked like they had some good teams coming in, right? Some good players, coming in. It appeared that they were on the precipice of not, I don't want to say that they were on the precipice of being a continual NCAA tournament team, but Coach Gillespie, I thought, had built enough up that this team, they were going to get it done. And though they ended the long losing streak over the weekend, beating Illinois in the final 2 games, they're out. What was it, a 15-game losing streak that they had in there at one point? They finish the season 6-17 in the Big Ten, in last place, and with it, they're out of the Big Ten tournament. I'm not here to call for a person's job in a sport that I don't follow that closely. I don't know, but I expected better this year. In a season where you're hosting the Big Ten tournament, where only 12 teams qualify out of the 14, and you don't even make the Big Ten tournament, it's just a bad look. It's a bad mark for the program and very frustrating. Look, us older people remember Gail Blevins and taking this program to the College World Series and the excitement that that generated and the way that softball has grown throughout the years since back when they were on and making the College World Series. And to get back to that level, obviously is going to be incredibly difficult. You look at the Big Ten, just one team even ranked in the top 30 in the RPI currently, and that's Northwestern. Softball's different. The South is dominating, much like it is in baseball. Still, this is frustrating because there's a lot of great talent here in the state of Iowa, and I know they're trying. They're trying to get those players to stay home. It's easier said than done. But in a year where you're hosting, it's a bad look for the softball program. We'll be back with you tomorrow here on Locked On Hawkeyes, your team every day. We got a lot more to get into. We will get you the latest on the Brendan Sullivan visit to Iowa City and potentially leading to a commitment from the signal caller and what that means for Iowa football. A lot of football talk, a lot of baseball talk, a lot of basketball talk. We got you covered, your team every day, and we talk Hawkeyes with you. As always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or for free on Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.